I was in a 27-year relationship. Over time, it just became verbally, emotionally, and physically toxic. It takes you a long time to actually name and be honest with yourself around what's actually happening. What happened then was that somebody was put in front of me who was going to be the person who would cause me to shift. Her name's Tracy Dimmick, and she is a psychic medium. Booked a session with her, and she literally said to me from the very first moment, "You're not speaking your truth. You're not doing what serves your highest good."
Welcome to the Awaken Magazine podcast, where we feature influential conscious leaders who share the real stories behind their spiritual journeys and how they're helping others awaken to love. I'm your host, David Trotter, and today I'm so excited to share with you a conversation with Michelle Wollaston. She says I have an accent. I'm not so sure about that. I think it might be the other way around, but I'll leave that up to you. I love the way she sounds. She is a consciousness and transformation coach, as well as an author, and she helps women in the midst of life who feel like they have disappeared find their voice, their strength, and their identity. So if that's you, if you are kind of feeling in the midlife range and feeling like, man, I feel like I've just disappeared in the midst of all the other responsibilities, I'm going to tell you this conversation is for you. Now, Michelle shares with us a bit about her childhood, which is very unique. She grew up around spiritual healing and consciousness in her own family, and that shaped her intuitive gifts from a very early age. She also shares with us how she went through a long-term toxic relationship and how it took her over a decade in order to get out of it. And I think that you will find that to be a very compelling conversation about how it's just difficult when we're in the midst of something where we're stuck. She also shares with us some clues about how to recognize if we have disappeared in our own life. And then, once we recognize that, how to come home to ourselves. Now, if you are longing for spiritual conversation that goes beyond the surface, you are in the right place. And I would ask you, encourage you, invite you to subscribe to the Awaken Magazine podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. These are all places where you can find both the video and audio formats of our conversations. And also, I would encourage you to share this episode with a friend who is wanting to awaken at a deeper level. All right, let's dive into this encouraging conversation with Michelle Wollaston. Michelle, it is great to see you today. Thanks so much for taking time to hang with us.
Hi, David. Great to join you.
I love to hear stories of awakening to consciousness, mindfulness, spirituality, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your upbringing. Did you have some sort of faith or spirituality that was a part of your life as you were growing up, or did that kind of develop later in life?
No, David, actually was part of my growing up. So when I was in my very early teenage years, maybe 11 to 12, my father actually had a bit of a health crisis. So I don't really think of it as an awakening because it's always been there. And through that crisis, he was then looking at alternative methods to get well. One of the major things that he was experiencing were very bad migraines and neck pains, and modern medicine wasn't really helping. So he started to look at alternative methods, such as acupuncture and meditation. And I think through meeting those practitioners and them suggesting alternative ways for him to ground and sort of feel into what was happening to him and intuitively try to work out why he was getting these symptoms, um, sort of set him on a path of deep diving into literally everything he could get his hands on. So,
Time?
sorry?
How old were you around that time?
When he first got ill, I was probably only 11 or 12. And I can remember him not being well, but as was fairly traditional in those days, you didn't discuss that sort of stuff. I'm talking the late 70s with your children, especially at our age. But I remember him going through the crisis, and then in the years that followed that, especially as he got into modalities. He got into energy healing, and he became friends with a lot of people who were healers and mediums. So as I got older, I became much more aware of what was happening around me, and I would experience mediums channeling spirit, and all sorts of things. So to me, it was quite normal. Even though for the time it wasn't something I went to school and discussed with my friends, I knew it wasn't that normal, but it was not abnormal to me to be around people who had all sorts of abilities and got to experience all sorts of amazing things. So it's just always been there, and I've learnt so much of it just from being exposed to that through a process of osmosis, I suppose.
Mhm. And
So
did you
yes, I do have grown up with a spiritual outlook.
Yeah, and did you start to sense that you had your own intuitive abilities? Was that in like, did that come up inside of you as a kid?
Um, I was always told when, especially when we were sitting in any form of circle or ritual where we were channeling, I was definitely always told that I had a lot of energy. And I think because of my age, I was utilized as a form of energy within anything that we were doing. I was exposed to healing very early. Never on my own. I was always doing it alongside my father or anybody else if we were doing energy healing, which I suppose today you consider Reiki, which was not even a term that we discussed very much back then. Um, but it's not probably until I've got a lot older that I've realized how intuitive I was when I was younger. And I think probably more intuitive when I was younger because I didn't have any of the obstacles that we put in place when we get older and start trying to logically think about what we're receiving.
Mhm,
But in hindsight, yes, I definitely know that I've always had that ability to kind of read a room.
mhm. And how did that play out in terms of your career path, slash life? At what point did you sense, okay, I feel called to utilize these gifts in order to help others?
Um, to the point where I feel like I really need to now use my lived experience to support other people, probably only in the last 10 or so years. So I came back into my spiritual practices um, through meeting my own mentor. And I originally just met her quite randomly, as often these things happen. And I had a psychic reading with her. And I think at that point, when I realized that I needed to move my situation because it was no longer serving me and got back into my practice in a full blown way,
Mhm,
that I then started to feel that need as the years went on to actually share that information with others. It's an interesting process, and I know other people who work in this space have a similar story. You don't it's almost, I suppose it's very similar to people who go into religion. It's a calling, and it's difficult to explain, and sometimes you really don't have a choice. Often spirit know what you are supposed to do, so they will just keep pushing you in that direction. And you just find that you're always having conversations around other people's crises that you tend to be going, well, have you thought about it from this perspective or have you tried this? So it just tends to come at you in a way. And then before you know it, you're kind of embedded in it and doing it as a thing.
Yeah, yeah. You have written a number of articles about the process of ending a long relationship and how that helped you kind of rediscover yourself and step into your power. Would you mind kind of walking us through that and helping us understand how that experience was transformative for you?
Sure. So I was in a 27-year relationship. So it was like most long term partnerships. We had three children, we had a mortgage. It was an everyday sort of full on thing. And over time, it just became verbally, emotionally, and physically toxic. And I think, like so many women, and especially women that I work with, and I'm not dismissing that this is an experience that men also have. It's just that I tend to work more with women. Um, and it takes you a long time to actually name and be honest with yourself around what's actually happening And I won't say to you because it's happening for you. It's all part of your spiritual evolution. And I literally had disappeared inside that life because I was trying so hard to survive it. I was managing what I thought were my obligations and expectations, that all of that noise drowns out your natural intuitive instincts because you go into a process of just surviving. And so part of that process, I think, when I didn't shift, I think what happened then was that somebody was put in front of me who was going to be the person who would cause me to shift, which is often what happens. You know, the person finds the person they need to be the person who is the word they hear. And this person, and I will, I'll mention her here because she's amazing. So her name's Tracy Dimmick, and she is a psychic medium. And I came across her path very randomly and booked a session with her. And she literally said to me from the very first moment, "You're not speaking your truth. You're not doing what serves your highest good." And I think why that resonated so loudly with me was because she was not part of my situation. And she also, I knew inherently that she was talking to me from my higher self. And that's nothing I've ever questioned. So I didn't have to deal with, "Oh yeah, are you really talking to me from spirit?" I inherently knew that. And I think that was the person who needed me to go, "Oh, this is the wake up call." And then it was from that moment on that I had to start taking steps. And it was not a fast process. It still took me a good, probably 10 years all up to go from that initial discussion to actually leaving. But it allowed me to start going back to my practice and listening to myself again.
Mhm. That is extraordinary when I hear the amount of time, Michelle, where you go, I had this kind of enlightening moment, this I've got to look in the mirror moment, and then 10 years. What was going on in that 10 years that got you to the place where you could take that next step?
Well, I think, which is part of your human experience. I mean, at that initial mark of having that initial moment of the light bulb going off,
Mm.
I still had 3 young teenage children, and the humanness of the situation still takes over. You're still juggling that place of, I know what I need to do. I've identified that I'm no longer happy where I am, but there's the whole huge other side of it of what's the impact it's going to have on my children, on myself. How will I manage? What will I do? And you do play that back and forth game quite a long time. I mean, I would say that if there's any midlife women listening to this at the moment, they'll be going, yeah, and so often people later will say, "Well, why didn't you just leave?" And it's like, because it's just not that easy. Logistically, it's not easy. There's a lot involved, and I can understand that unless you're at a point where you actually feel that your safety is at risk, that it can be quite a long time to come to. So I think while you're juggling all of that, you're just waiting for that right time. And for me, it was at a point where I knew I had to go, but I was also at a point where my children were then of an age where they'd all had left school. And I felt more comfortable that they were going to be able to emotionally support themselves from a young adult perspective rather than a young child perspective. Um, and I had also worked very, very hard in the 12 months leading up to me going with my mentor to manifest my next step. And so I had the dream job land in my lap, which enabled me to financially make that key decision of, okay, I can go. Because I did just go with nothing. I didn't take anything. I just was like, the first thing I need to do is leave. So I think that's why it took me such a long time. And it also took me a long time to actually come back into my practice in a way that I could actually start to see the intuitive messages coming in, and I could feel the alignment regulating to a point where I could control the frequency of myself. so that I didn't keep dipping in and out of that sort of wave of emotions and all of that sort of stuff that comes along with it.
Mhm. I'm just taking in, your wisdom and your experience because, I can imagine just the amount of time, the questions that arise in my head are like, oh my gosh, what was going on with your husband? How is your relationship happening? Is it just dead the entire time? Is it just emotionless, while you're trying to make these plans and step into your own? Is it abusive? I mean, just all of these things that we don't necessarily need to go into. It's just I feel the magnitude of that process that you went through and the amount of um, internal fortitude and resilience and courage to kind of like take that next step that you're feeling called to. I just want to like recognize that within you and how much, like you said, the struggle between the kids, but I'm having like this not a good relationship and I want to like take my next step. What would you say to women or men who are feeling stuck and maybe they go, "Hey, this just is not working for me. I've tried again, I've tried different ways." What would you say to them in this moment?
Um, I think when if you can recognize that you're in a space where you have so much noise around you, whatever that looks like, and this doesn't even necessarily have to be in a relationship space. I talk a lot around the fact that we have a comfort meter, and that is our intuition starting off whispering at us and eventually smacking us so hard with a 2x4 that the whole point is that it's meant to move you. And I think a lot of people have to first of all admit to themselves that they're in the situation in the first place, and that the reason that they have a relationship that they don't feel satisfied, happy, safe in, or it could be a workplace, it could be a friendship. There are a lot of different contexts
Yes.
around that discomfort that you feel. A relationship clearly is the one that rocks you the most because it's the foundation of everything that you are. But you can be in a perfectly wonderful relationship and family dynamic, but you could be in a really bad workplace dynamic and be experiencing the same emotional turmoil. Um, so I think, first of all, it's a matter of identifying what's going on. And then once you have the capacity to go, this is not serving me anymore, to be able to shut some of that noise out so you can start hearing the intuitive messages that you're getting. And they come in lots of different ways. You'll have those messages come to you physically. So you will feel lethargic, ill, unmotivated, um, sleep, not being able to sleep. Like there's lots of physical things that occur to you when you're not balanced. Then you actually have all of those emotional signals. So, why am I crying all the time? Why do I always feel sad? There's all of that part of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a manic depressive. It just means that emotionally, your body's trying to get you to understand that this is not normal. You shouldn't feel like this day to day. And then you have all of the external noise that comes at you, which is if it's a relationship, it could be the other person, because all of the other people who are in our space are also living their own human experience and they're learning their lesson. So we're projecting off each other all the time. And that's all external to us. So you're dealing with the other person. So if it's a workplace, it could be a toxic boss or a toxic workmate, or it could be a complete toxic culture. So you have the external environmental chaos that goes into that. So when you add all of those different discomfort zones together, that's a lot of noise. And then once you kind of can identify, well, this is not serving me, I need to move, it's about putting boundaries in place. And you just have to start with one small boundary and one small piece of truth that you speak to yourself, because once you take that first step, it's very empowering.
What would be some examples of speaking that truth to yourself? What are some examples of that?
I think the first truth that you would speak to yourself would be to actually admit, I'm at a point where I need to move. and this is not going to serve me. And the reason I'm not moving is fear. It's always fear. It's fear of, as I suggested, what am I going to do around my children? What am I going to do to financially support myself? That's all fear. Because at the end of the day, when you look back on it, everything worked out fine. Everyone's happy, and I'm financially capable to support myself. In a workplace situation, it could be I'm fearful of leaving my job. What if I don't get another one? Your ego will always talk louder than your intuition because it's there to make you think about this. So it's that sort of truth that you need to speak. And you can't always speak that while you've got all the noise around you feeding the fear. So you've just got to speak that one thing to yourself that lets you just go, no, I'm drawing a line in the sand.
Mm-hmm. So now you have stepped into a new season of life, and I could be, I don't want to, maybe I get this wrong, but did I read an article where you wrote about taking a trip on your own, like a vacation on your own for the first time? Did I read that article from
No,
you?
I wasn't on my own, but I wasn't with my family. So what I had done, it was in the year before I separated, and my cousin actually had said to me about 18 months beforehand, I want to go to Hawaii. Do you want to come? And that didn't go down very well at home. So it kind of just kept getting put on the back burner. And then I just said, yes, okay, we'll go. And I would not have ordinarily ever done that. I would never have gone away without my family. We always went away together. It was not something I ever would have done, or it would not have been acceptable for me to have just packed off myself and said, I'm going away for 2 weeks. You're all on your own. But by this stage, my youngest was 15 or 16. And I just did. And I packed my bags and I took myself off to Hawaii for 10 days. And that was sort of at the very last moments. That was 2018. So the very last moments of me sort of saying, that's it. And then everything else started to fall into place from that point. And by the March of 2019, I'd actually left the home.
And how did that trip feel? Like, did that feel exhilarating or did it feel nerve wracking, or how was that for you?
No, it was fantastic. We had an amazing time. It was probably the first time where I had gone away where I didn't have to be a mother. I didn't have to deal with trying to organize a tribe of people and what are we going to do today and all of that sort of stuff. I just had to organize me, and I could please myself what I wanted to do. So yeah, it was incredibly liberating. And I think it was probably one of those comfort steps that I needed to take so that I could learn that, yes, I can be on my own quite easily. And also, I think for me to realize that it was more around the boys, that they're fine because they just went, yeah, okay, mum, fine, bye. And it hasn't been until much later that when I now speak to them, and they're all in their 20s, that they'll just say, I don't know why you stayed as long as you did. And that's another thing that I think, especially as mothers, we are so concerned about the emotional impact, and rightly so, that this sort of situation has on our children, that sometimes we forget that our children are not blind. And they are sort of kind of thinking as well, why are you putting up with this? And why are you letting this happen? And it's a very important lesson that we're teaching our children by staying. Is that actually the right thing to do? Or should you be teaching them that no, you need to be respectful of yourself and self-empowering, and you do not allow anything like that to occur to you? So it becomes a very convoluted sort of emotional space that you're navigating because you're trying to teach them the right thing, but are you actually?
Hmm. Yeah. And so now we're 6, 7 years later. And when you meet people and they say, Michelle, what do you do? Like, what would you say? How would you describe it? What would you call yourself?
I tend to use the word spiritual advocate. I guess mainstream, I would say to people, well, I'm a coach, I'm a mentor, and I've always been in that space. I'm a learning and development professional by trade. So I've spent over 15 years teaching people in the vocational education space. So I'm used to educating adults. So I do mentor, I do coach, but I think from this perspective, it's turning that skill into having people, first of all, understand where they're at and then meeting them where they're at and then providing them the strategies that they need to start to see what's going on and hear themselves and make the appropriate decisions. So, for the want of a better word, maybe a life coach. I don't know, there's lots of those jargony tags that float around. I just like to,
Say that again. I'm so sorry.
as long as I'm supporting people.
Yeah, yeah. You said you've been 15 years in a learning and development. What was the word you used?
In Australia, because that's where I'm from, we have a system out here. It's called vocational education. So if you choose to leave school and become a tradesman, so you might be a bricklayer or a mechanic or whatever, we do that underneath the vocational education sector, where you go and you learn your trade, which is different to the school or in your case, the college system. And it's different to that higher education system, which is university, where you might go if you want to become a doctor or a lawyer or a whatever. And I I commenced in that because I was actually an early childhood educator for many years. And then I got into the training sector to then train other early childhood educators. And then from there, I just stayed in that sector and it's technically called learning and development. So I'm very used to teaching and mentoring and supporting people.
Yes. It's so wonderful having this conversation with you because, I talk to a lot of people, I interview a lot of people, and there is just a real sense of groundedness with you, Michelle. Like I sense this, like I know who I am. I feel confident. I'm helping people. You're incredibly articulate. I feel like a little bit of a no nonsense. Like I'm going to tell you kind of what's going on here, right? But
And I can be a bit like that.
I'm on
Yeah.
your team. I'm on your side. Like I'm helping you move forward. Yeah, I can feel that within you. You have well, let me before we go into this resource that you've developed, I am curious about who are the primary people that you serve and what are the kind of the most common challenges that they're facing.
Um, I think that you tend to always have people navigate towards you who you are most like in an experience perspective. So I've worked with a lot of different people and primarily I do work with women because my lived experience is that of a woman. And as I said before, I would never not work with a man, but I just don't think I'm best placed to serve them the way they need. But that would never mean that I wouldn't offer them support and strategies if they needed it. I mean, I have 3 boys, so I live that every day. Um, but primarily, I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 years that the people who tend to navigate towards me are women who are in that midlife space. And I know for me, as I got to 50, I sort of got to a point where I was like, I'm just not doing this anymore. I think you sort of have a little bit of a light bulb moment when you get to that sort of age. I'm sure for some people it could happen a little bit earlier, a little bit later, but there's sort of that midlife range of women. And I think it's when they're at a point where their children are not babies anymore, but they're sort of in that younger school to coming into teenage years. So they're now, not only are they mothers and partners, but they're probably gone back into the workforce. So they have that added issue as well that they're now trying to juggle work and family. And often I've discovered now that we're also, and this occurred to me as well, that you're also then in a space where your own parents are possibly becoming more reliant on you. So now not only are you a daughter, but you're also often a carer. And that then adds another layer of complexity onto all the other things that you're now juggling in your life. And I think, and I will not say that I think any of us manage that space well. And I don't think we should have to. I think it's a world expectation that's been placed upon women in general that you are just supposed to be able to juggle all these plates in the air and keep them there. And I think it's something that we've had put upon us. It's not something that we're supposed to take on. But because we're feminine energy, we naturally nurture. So we don't stop to say no. So I find that the women that come to me are in this space somewhere, if not in multiple spaces, and they just need to know how to stop one part of it so that they can breathe and recalibrate, really. But I think for women, from the time you're sort of 45, 50, it becomes a very complex space.
Mhm. I think they call that the sandwich generation where you're kinda still taking care of your own kids, but then you're also beginning to, care for your mom and dad. Yeah, it's challenging. You have a resource on your website called Self Reconnection: Gentle Strategies for Women Who Feel Like They've Disappeared. You used that word disappeared earlier. You felt like you had disappeared in your relationship. Of course, we'll link to this resource in the show notes, but what are some possible signs that we are disappearing from our own lives? What would that look like?
I think often you will feel emotionally very flat, um, exhausted. Often you're walking the door at the end of the day and it would just be like too much because you've walked into dinner and you've just left work and it's just a lot of that overwhelm that you feel emotionally that you just don't seem like you can get your head above water. Um, I think often you will feel a disconnect from your body. You may actually be feeling physical symptoms, so aches, pains, which naturally come with fatigue and lethargy. You get that run down sort of feeling in your body. Um, you're often, and you may not recognize it, but you're living from a survival mode perspective. So you're just managing, you're coping, you're pushing through all of the things that you have mounting up in front of you, because as I said, there's an expectation that that's what you will do, and you will be seen as, the Stepford housewife where everything's wonderful and the hair's done, but underneath there's this boiling cauldron of mess happening. Um, and so I think they're the signs that you probably have happening all around you, but you're not actually seeing them for what they are. And again, that's why I talk about that comfort meter. When you are at a level of discomfort in anywhere at all, that's your sign to stop and go, why? Because life is not meant to be uncomfortable. Life is meant to be joyous. It's meant to be a learning experience for our soul. It's not meant to be traumatic and horrible. So um, I think that anything that's not comfortable is a time for you to stop and go, oh, what's wrong? This should not be like this.
So, what would it feel like to reappear or reconnect to ourselves? What does that feel like? Almost like cast a vision for us for what that could be like if we feel like we've disappeared in this moment.
I think you actually start to just feel balanced. I think you'll start to notice that you could be sleeping better. You're not feeling like you can't get out of bed in the morning, and you're not feeling like you need to fall into bed of a night. You may actually find that you're putting yourself first in small ways. So you're actually saying, no, I'm not going to do that load of washing. I'm going to go for a walk. Or no, I'm not going to cook dinner tonight. We're going to get takeaway. You suddenly get to a point where you will start to put yourself first. You'll set those boundaries. Um, you'll notice that a sort of ease returns. So as you work for yourself on yourself and you actually raise that vibrational frequency internally, things just will become easier. And some of the turmoil that you've been experiencing, which is the message that you needed to hear, starts to ease because universally you're hearing the message. So now the message can be um, sort of turned off a bit because you're starting to get it. So that's how energy works. So the idea is that, as you start to recognize what's not working, that falls away because you've learnt that. So you'll often hear the words grace and ease, and it's something my mentor taught me. She said, you're here to be living a life of grace and ease. And that is what happens. Things become easier.
What does that
And
mean? What does it mean, grace and ease?
I think it literally means that you are in a position where everything comes to you that you need. And I feel I'm in that position now. Like I don't I don't ever have to try very hard to have the financial situation or the abundant situation that I need. I don't live in a space anymore where I really worry about, am I going to have enough money or am I going to have enough time? I'm abundant in many ways. Um, I find that things will just work out for me, and I can work out very quickly if something is difficult and it only has to be difficult for a couple of weeks, then that's not for me. I need to put that down and try something different. So you become far more in tune with what should be working and what isn't working, which means you don't get to a messy space because once you feel the mess happening, you know to put it away, it's not working, and to try something different. Um,
How do you know the difference between
well,
I need to persevere, like I need to persevere through this challenging situation versus this is really not for me? How do you differentiate between the two?
well, if you keep well, the thing is, it's that comfort thing. So the more you persevere within something that's not meant for you, the louder that noise becomes. So if you're in a workspace that has become toxic for some reason, and it simply just could be that this is actually not the job that is lighting you up, but for whatever reason you don't feel like you can move, you will start to find that you're taking a lot of sick leave. You don't want to go in the morning. You start to run late. You are not feeling moved to do the work. And then if that still isn't enough to move you, then you might find the next thing that happens is there's a person that you feel is bullying you or harassing you, or the job you're trying to finish just keeps falling over and you can't seem to get the project off the ground. So there will be all of these things that will happen the more you keep trying to push into the space where you're not meant to be. And that noise will eventually get so loud that you will be forced to pivot, because it could be that your health falls apart to the point where you physically can't be where you need to be. The universe has that way of, as I said, hitting you really hard if you're not moving. And I think most people will recognize that it's your health probably that suffers the first. That's the first thing that goes, will be your health. Anything from constantly getting coughs and colds to actually having chronic pain and breakdown.
Mhm. Mm. So you work with people one on one, and I'm just curious about the different modalities that you draw upon because I know that you're not just kind of quote unquote a life coach. You have different things that you're bringing to the table. What are those modalities and how do you integrate them in the work?
A couple of years ago, I was drawn to learn astrology. I'm often drawn to learn things just because they interest me. And then I find later on down the track that they're actually really fantastic diagnostic tools. Um, I would say astrology is one of the most amazing diagnostic tools, and we don't understand that well enough. So, the very first thing I do when I'm working with someone is ask for their birth data as much as they have got available. So, ideally, your day, date, time, and all the rest of it. And I will look at their natal chart. I will specifically look at their north and south node, because they are the nodes that will indicate to you the karma you've brought in this journey and where you're actually meant to be heading directionally. I'll look at the asteroid Chiron, because that's our wounded healer. So that says, what are the wounds that you're carrying into this life that you're trying to evolve out of? And then I'll also look at everybody's progressed moon. So one thing I found fascinating when I learned astrology was that we're all very familiar with the progressed moon across a 28-day month and the 8 cycles that it runs through. But that same cycle actually runs across our life every 29 and a half years. So if you go back to determine what moon phase a person was born under, so I was born under a new moon phase, and that new moon phase, depending at what point in the phase I was born, so if I was born at the very beginning of the new moon phase, for my first 3.5 years of life, I was in a new moon. And then for the next 3.5 years of life, I move into the first quarter moon. So between the ages of 0 and 29, 30 is your first moon phase of your life. And the energy in each of those phases is the same energy that you feel through the month as the moon phases through its energetic cycle. So that can tell you a lot. If you look at a person when they come to you and you can determine what the moon phase energetically is for them right now, it can actually explain to them, well, this is why this is happening. So when I look back on mine, as I was coming out of my relationship in 2018, I was actually in a balsamic moon, which is the period that you have just before the new moon. And that is a period of release. And so I released my relationship. I released the employment that I was in to move into the new employment cycle. And then within that 3.5 years, I also bought a home. And I also lost my mum. So I did a lot of releasing in that 3.5 years as I was moving into the next 3.5 years, which I'm just coming out of now, which is my new moon. And I'm in that process now where I'm planting lots of those seeds to take me into my next, whatever's left, 15 years or whatever of this cycle. So the progressed moon is really, really a telling sign for people. And then once I'm actually in the sessions with them, I'll often call on oracle cards and tarot cards to assist me if I feel I need to. But primarily, it's my intuition, because when I'm working with someone, and anybody that plays in this space will tell you that what I do is I connect to my higher self and my spirit guides. And when I'm working with you, you're connecting to your higher self and your spirit guides. And that conversation that's happening in spirit is intuitively coming through to me for what you need to hear. So that's always the prime source. And often when we're finished, unless we've recorded it, I could not go back and tell you what I had just said.
Probably should record them.
Oh, well, I always say to them, if you want to record this, go right ahead, because I won't remember.
Yeah.
So
That's good. Tell us more about your book. It's entitled Embrace Spirituality and Enhance Your Human Experience, available on Amazon. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I decided I'd write my book. It was about 2020. I decided I'd write the book, and it was coming out of COVID, where we'd all been locked down and we're basically online 24/7 trying to, get some form of socialization happening. I was involved in a lot of courses and things just for my own interest. And I was really puzzled with the amount of people who were entering into spiritual type courses and teachings, but they weren't ready for it. They didn't have any of that foundational understanding that you need. Like I can't take someone and start talking to them about raising their vibration and their frequency when they have got no idea what those words even mean. You've got to take it back to those baby steps. And I just felt like there needs to be some sort of learner guide, like going back into what I do as a job. There needs to be a learning guide that teaches people what this is all about so that they can learn the foundational principles of spirituality and the laws of the universe and the hermetic principles and all that sort of stuff. So I decided to write that learner guide. So this book basically starts at the beginning and takes you through what all of the concepts and jargon means. And I developed it in a way where it is also a journaling tool. So as you move through each of the chapters, it actually then gives you activities to make you stop and go, okay, so you've now read this. Think about what that means to you and write down what it feels or what you're getting or what is your current situation. So ideally, by the time they've got to the end of it, they understand better the concepts that those of us in this space all talk about. And then also maybe come to some sort of personal realization around why certain things trigger them or why, they're getting this comfort meter thing happening. And it sort of just allows them to have those baby steps so they can make really informed decisions when they now start moving forward into, I need to go and see a psychic medium. How do I know it's a good one? Or I want to go and practice astrology, or I need to go and learn tarot. It just allows you to have that foundational understanding before you go off into the deeper dive of what's out there. And there is so much out there.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Michelle, you work with people not just in Australia, but I would assume you're available to work with people around the globe, correct? Good. And where can people connect with you and work with you?
They can connect with me. I have a website, which is just michellewollaston.com, and you can reach out to me there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. All of the links to my socials will be in the show notes. You could, as you said, you could purchase my book on Amazon. And yeah, if you just feel like you want to reach out and ask a question, feel free to do that. And if you would like to work with me, I'm more than excited to do that with you as well.
Wonderful. Michelle, thank you for sharing your story, your wisdom. So powerful, the truths that you're sharing with us today, and really appreciate all that you're doing in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, David, for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Awaken Magazine podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and our other conversations, would you mind taking a moment to leave a 5-star review and maybe even a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? That's one of the ways that you can give back to the show and help us reach more people. And of course, feel free to share the episode with a friend. And if you're not already on our email list, we send out an inspiring email every Monday morning full of articles and interviews. Just head on over to awakenedmagazine.com and click subscribe and join for free. Our hope is that all the resources we share will help our world continue awakening to love.